Hello, and welcome to your Thursday edition of Remote Learning. I am your host slash teacher, Mr. Cotty, as I've been here for all of your lessons so far. We are back here in the basement, and we are ready to learn more about George versus George today. Okay, so a couple of things right off the bat. Please, Miss Grace posted a video of how to post assignments correctly on Google Classroom. If you are having trouble with that, please watch that video. She walks you through step by step, and it's awesome. Now, the second thing is to make sure that you guys are reading carefully and following directions. I'm giving you everything you need. I've got people ask me, telling me I don't have this book, or asking me questions, and it's all in the directions. Please, your life and my life in this process will be much easier if you guys are just reading exactly what I'm giving you. I'm giving it all to you. I'm giving you guys individualized steps. Now, that's my public service announcement for today. Also, second public service announcement is I'm going to be signing off of classrooms a little bit earlier. I've been staying on until 9, 10 o'clock answering questions. I can't do that. If you guys are asking questions past like 7:30, like when stuff is due, 8 o'clock, you might not get a response until the next day, which if it's that much of an issue, I'll see it. I'm going to be grading more in the morning than I am late at night. It's just not fair that I'm grading work at 10:30 at night when really I need to get up and sleep, so I'm ready for you guys tomorrow morning. It was great to video chat with you guys today, and I hope that we can get more people involved. So shout out to Kimura, Andrea, Kaylee, who was like Little Miss Chat, Adrian popped in for a little bit, Ariana popped in, Nicole was there running around her house and then eating chocolate chip cookies. So it was great to see all of you guys. I hope to see more of you tomorrow, and it's like our own personal little lunch bunch. So if I were you, I'd want to hop in too, and plus I miss you guys and I want to see you. So more importantly, today's lesson. We're going to be finishing up lesson 2 today. It's the second part of lesson 2. Alright? So we're going to be thinking about the same focus question of what are the perspectives in George versus George. And so far, we know that it is the colonists and the British. They're against each other, and we're still trying to figure out why. Okay? I gave you guys that video yesterday. It was about the American Revolution, and it's hard to not give you guys spoilers because of all I know about the Revolution, because we still have to read the book. So if I give you everything ahead of time, there's no point in us reading the book. So I tried to keep as few spoilers out of there as possible. Now, we're going to be having the same content framing question today, which is what is happening on pages 7 through 17, but more specifically today, pages 12 through 17, okay? And our other main question for today is how can different perspectives lead to conflict? Now, I'm going to underline different, and I'm going to circle the word conflict, okay? Yesterday we talked about similar perspectives and how George Washington and King George saw things very similarly, and that sometimes the colonists and the British had similar ideas as well. Today we're going to be getting away from that and focusing on the differences, okay? And now, if you don't know what the word conflict means means a problem, basically, okay? So a conflict is a problem. Now, people having different views can definitely cause problems. If you think one thing and your brother or sister thinks another thing, you guys are probably going to argue about it. If I think one thing and a friend of mine thinks another thing, we're probably going to have not an argument, but a conversation, trying to convince each other to see who is correct or incorrect. So today we have two different sides, obviously. We have the British and colonial perspectives, okay? So right now we're going to read 12 through 17, okay? So please, a lot of people have been asking, where do I get the book? How do I know where to get the evidence? I'm reading you guys the book. You need to listen and watch carefully. The beauty of it is that you can pause the video anytime you'd like and jot some things down. it would not be a bad idea to be taking notes as I'm reading. And it's not like in school where you have to say, oh, Mr. Kai, can you repeat that? You guys just hit the pause button, write it down, and you're good to go. All right, so here we go. A look at the life of King George and his countrymen. King George III was 22 years old when he succeeded his grandfather as king in 1760. He was married to a German princess named Charlotte, and they would become the parents of 15 children. The king was absolutely devoted to his family. Their favorite home was a palace in the English countryside surrounded by roses, pinks, carnations, and orange, lemon, and tea trees. But they spent most of their time in a small red brick mansion called Buckingham Palace, usually known as the Queen's House, and the Queen still lives in Buckingham Palace today, in London, England, which is the capital of Great Britain, which we talked about yesterday. And that's where the king works. London, with its 740,000 inhabitants, was the biggest city in Europe and the center of British government. London's residents were proud of their long history and high level of cultural achievement. For fun, they went to mass balls and the theater, gambled at cards, dice, and roulette, belonged to all sorts of clubs, and met at coffee houses, taverns, cockfighting, chop houses, and pleasure gardens. So they had a lot of like fancier kind of like things that normally people didn't get involved with. I'm not involved with really any of those things. And they had noisy streets with horses, carriages, ballad singers, flower sellers, fish sellers, and ladies and gentlemen in white fancy wigs wearing the latest fashion. So they were very up to date. They were very wealthy, a lot of them. But the overcrowded city had its share of problems too. The death rate was high, and the coal that residents used as fuel caused black rain and thick, sooty smog. Food and drinking water were often unhealthy. Riots were common, and public hangings drew rowdy mobs, so meaning that if someone was convicted of a crime and their punishment was to be hung, they would do it in front of a crowd of people, which is a pretty wild concept to think about, and thank goodness that that stuff doesn't happen anymore. Thousands of beggars and pickpockets were evidence of poverty running amok, so meaning that even though there were so many rich people that did all those fancy things, like go to balls and theaters and gamble and have dinners together, there was also a lot of poor people who had to find out a way that they could survive also. The English were convinced that the rest of the British Empire was backward and uncivilized. King George ruled 31 colonies and other possessions in many parts of the world, from Borneo to the Bay of Bengal, all the way to Honduras. Throughout England, people argued constantly about world politics, but they would soon argue especially about the hard uprising of the Americans. And an uprising means like they're trying to get more powerful, they're trying to grow themselves. A look at the life of George Washington and his countrymen. Excuse me. Of course, I'm still drinking all my water, but George Washington was married to a wealthy widow named Martha Custis. Tiny, outgoing, and plump, Martha was a charming hostess. More than 2,000 guests visited their Mount Vernon home in the years before 1775. Martha, who had 2 young children from a previous marriage, and Washington adored them. Mount Vernon is actually in New York. You can go there if you'd like. The couple enlarged Mount Vernon to an enormous self-contained community. George Washington grew tobacco and switched to wheat. Besides raising mules, sheep, hogs, and prize bulls, he also bred horses and foxhounds, netted tons of fish, and grew something such as wild grapes, Indian corn, oats, clover, flax seeds, hemp, and nuts, apples, pears, apricots, and cherry trees. So he was really into his farming, and I think he used a lot of it to do a lot of good. Okay? He even grew oranges that spent the winter in his greenhouse. Gardeners, shoemakers, blacksmith, weavers, foremen, and sometimes Washington's nieces and nephews all lived at the estate. So he turned his house into like a small town, like a small city. Washington, like all other plantation owners at the time, Washington was a slave owner. By 1775, he owned about 135 people. About 90% of the colonists in America lived out in the country, where new arrivals from Europe were amazed to find farmland, forests, fish, and game as far as the eye could see. So much fertile territory made it impossible to supply Great Britain with raw goods such as furs, flour, iron, tobacco, and lumber in return for manufactured goods, including cloth, shoes, furniture, and tea from Great Britain. In small but bustling port cities such as Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and Charleston, all places that I've been, whaling and shipbuilding were already major industries. And there were lumber mills, which means just like trees and logs, flour mills, factories, firehouses, and colleges. Streets were paved with most full of mud or dust, overflowed with ox carts, horses and carriages, chimney sweeps, sailors, and carriers of wood. In local taverns, young girls danced lively jigs with their boyfriends. The most well-off, best-educated people were usually planters like George Washington, merchants, doctors, ministers, or lawyers. Next came a very large middle class that included small farmers, shoe keepers, teachers, craftsmen, and fishermen. The poorest were unskilled laborers, indentured servants, and of course black slaves from Africa who were bought, sold, and held in bondage in all 13 colonies. So even though George Washington had slaves, he wasn't the only person that had them. There were slaves in all 13 colonies. And as we've talked about, slavery, slave trade was not fair, but we need to continue. Many colonies wanted to settle the new territory that helped win the 7 Years' War, but Great Britain made that illegal. London thought it was fairest to reserve these lands for the Native Americans who had lived there and hunted there. George Washington agreed with plenty of colonial settlers who thought the law unfairly limited their rights. They poured into the West anyway. So meaning that the colonies had a border, so they could only go a certain way across the country as per the British law. But they were like, hey, we want to keep going. So they eventually just said, forget you, Britain, we're going west anyway. Even though that land is supposed to be for the Native Americans. So keep that in mind. How government worked in England. Don't worry, these are the last 2 pages, I promise. The British government was a constitutional monarchy, which was a fancy way of saying King George did not have all the power. He and a young governing body called Parliament worked together to rule the empire. Young King George tried hard, and with much success, to see that some very strong opponent, and it was the Parliament that made laws and controlled the purse strings. So if you look, it says that King George is here, on the same level as the British Parliament. Then there's the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Okay, so the House of Lords were kind of like well-known people, nobles, and then the commoners were obviously just traditional settlers, or British rather. And then below that all was the voters. So the people voted to elect people to the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the Parliament. Now, how government worked in America. The 13 American colonies were not yet united into a single country, so we're not quite the United States yet. Each separate colony was under the Crown's rule, and each had its own governor and governing body that made laws to and imposed taxes. Some people who served in the government were elected by the colonists. For example, George Washington was elected member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, the lower house. For years, England had looked the other way when the colonists ignored the British laws they didn't like. So, it says here that King George and the British Parliament are the real rulers of the colonies. Then, each colony had its own leader. Then, under each leader of the colony, there was a governing body, meaning a group of people that worked together to create the laws for that specific colony. Then under that, there's the upper house and the lower house. The upper house was the king and his representatives, and the lower house was the common colonists. Then all of those people came together to vote. And it says here that you had to be 21 or older to vote. That's no longer the rule. It's now 18. So when you turn 18, you go register to vote. Now, that's the reading for today. Again, if you're having trouble, rewatch it or watch the other YouTube video I've sent. I'll include that link in the lesson as well. Now, today you're going to be doing a chart. The chart is very simple. It's helping you guys separate the British and colonial perspectives. And it's fill in the blanks. So that's great. And the first two examples that are on each chart are as follows. And this is, again, different perspectives. The colonial people see it one way, the British see it another way, okay? So, British perspective. They thought that blank was father of the people. And the British thought that King George, so I'll put in George the Third, was the father of the people. They thought that blank was a traitor. And we know that that's George Washington. So we're just going to put G-O, Wash. Now, on the colonial side, it says they thought that blank was a royal brute. Obviously, they did not like George III and thought that he was the royal brute. They thought that George Washington was the father of the country, okay? And there's multiple examples under these that you guys will fill in on your own. Now, quickly, because I know this video is a little long, but I did all the reading for you, so stick with me for one more minute. I'm giving you guys a RACS question again today. I've been extremely disappointed with your RACS responses and the number of people who are asking me what RACS is. We've been using RACS for almost 3 months. It's restate, answer, cite, sum up, okay? You know that for short responses, you need at least 4 to 5 sentences. So I've put it down here again. If you don't know it, write it down as I'm saying it. RACS. R is for restate, A is for answer, C is for cite evidence. You cite a second piece of evidence, and then you sum up at the end, okay? Please make sure you're following RACS for the question I give you today. Please watch Miss Grace's video on how to properly upload, and join the video chat today, all right? See you guys later. Bye.